Storytelling is by far the most underrated skill when it comes to business. Let this quote by Gary Vaynerchuk sink in just for a moment. We often hear about the latest leadership hacks or cutting-edge strategies, but how often do we talk about storytelling as a core leadership skill? If you're like most leaders, probably not at all. In fact, congratulate yourself if you are the odd one out and do talk about storytelling as a communication skill. Storytelling isn't just for marketers or movie directors. It's the very skill that can make or break your ability to lead and inspire your employees, teams, colleagues, customers, and other stakeholders. Hello and welcome back to my relaunch podcast, now going by the name of Story Driven Business Podcast. If you are new to this podcast, my name is Susanna and I am known as the world's leading modern employee branding expert and innovator. I recently published a book called Story Driven Employee Branding with 340 pages of inspiration, insight, and examples on how to convert your campaign-led employer branding into a systematic method applying the science of story and the science of persuasive communication. This book, I've been told, is a game changer to business communication, regardless of who you want to impact, influence, convince, or convert as a business lead, team lead, or as an employer. Now get this book now from Amazon or a signed copy directly from me with a little note through storydrivenemployeebranding.com. In this episode of Story Driven Business Podcast, I share with you about storytelling as a leadership skill and what an important skill it is. Let me begin with a quick story. Earlier in my career, I worked for a company with a CEO who was a brilliant communicator on paper, but as a leader, they struggled to communicate in a way that positively moved people. I remember one meeting where they unveiled some new plans. The plan seemed sound. It was full of data and logic, but the delivery. Imagine a massive number of PowerPoint slides filled with jargon and bullet points. You had to choose whether you listened to them speaking or try to make sense of what was written on each of the slides. I watched people in the audience politely applaud, but their faces showed that they were confused when they walked out of the room. A few weeks later, something really fascinating happened. One of the team leads who was frustrated with the lack of excitement decided to try a different approach. At the next meeting, they told a story about an imaginary customer whose life would be changed by the new product that this company was working on, and how then this particular team were the wizards making it happen. And what happened was that this team lead gave the strategy a face, a hero, and a narrative. This made the mood in the room shift. People sat up, they nodded, they even smiled, and suddenly the dry strategy had transformed into a shared and understandable mission, inviting this audience along. This is such an incredible example of how facts and figures do inform, but stories are the ones that actually inspire action. I have made this story up, but don't you think that this could happen in your company too? And probably does all the time. In today's episode of Story Driven Business Podcast, I want to convince you that storytelling is more than a communication trick. It's actually a core leadership skill, and perhaps the most underrated one in business. Join me exploring why storytelling works so powerfully in leadership, how it helps improve clarity and decision making, why it forges emotional connections and aligns culture, and how it turns strategies into movements. We'll also talk about why so many leaders struggle to communicate impactfully and how embracing storytelling can actually fix that. This is a 2-episode. So I had this episode as part 1, and then next week you're gonna hear episode 2. Along the way, I will share some insights from experts and thought leaders like Donald Miller, Brené Brown, and Simon Sinek, who all in their own way champion the power of story. I'll also pull back a curtain on some key frameworks from my new book, Story-Driven Employer Branding, to show how storytelling connects leadership, communication, and culture into one magnetic force. By the end of these 2 episodes, I hope you'll be thinking, I never thought of it that way. I need to learn more about storytelling. So let's start with diving in with a fundamental question. Why is storytelling so crucial for leaders? Some people hear storytelling and assume that it means entertaining others or adding a bit of fluff to a presentation. But in reality, storytelling in business is about convening meaning and purpose in a way that inspires and empowers people to join. And it's not about a once upon a time fairy tale. It's a strategic narrative that carries your vision and values forward. In fact, the ability to tell a story isn't just nice to have. It's the key to standing out, especially in this world where we are really drowning in information. And as leaders, our job isn't just to assign tasks and analyze numbers. Our job is to inspire and guide people toward a common goal, whether we're talking about our employees, whether we're talking about our job seekers, or whether we're talking about our customers or potential customers and other stakeholders. And nothing does that quite so well as a compelling story. So why is storytelling such an important leadership skill that I actually said that it's a core leadership skill? Let me explain this. I want you to think about a leader, any great leader that you admire, because chances are that you admire them because they are actually great storytellers. Steve Jobs, for example, he didn't just announce new products. He set the stage with stories about overcoming computing challenges or envisioning a world united by technology. Jobs is still frequently quoted as saying, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation. I think that's a pretty strong statement, but it underscores that leadership is fundamentally about setting that vision and those values. And this is exactly what storytellers do. Did you know that neuroscience tells us that our brains light up for stories? So no wonder every time we want to visualize an inspirational and innovation or ideation setting, we add that light bulb next to our brain or head. Well, that's why, because our brains light up when we hear a story. When we hear a story, we actually process information better through a narrative because we can remember it longer because the story gives it context. And in fact, stories are the most amazing way to clarify complex ideas, inspire action, and stick with us longer than just seeing facts and figures. But by contrast, when a leader just rattles off figures and abstract concepts, our brains don't engage in the same way. We might even comprehend just for a little moment, but then we are soon worn out because of the complexity and notice that we totally lost our attention. Stories captivate our attention and keep us compelled all the way through. So in other words, we didn't connect with the message. It was like a vehicle that passed us on another lane, and we didn't even pay attention to that happening or what kind of vehicle it was, what color vehicle it was, how many people was in there, who was driving it. We just ignored it. So that's what happens in our brain when the leader rattles just figures and abstract concepts, but not with storytelling. So storytelling triggers this emotional engagement and makes the message resonate on a much deeper level so that it sticks. Donald Miller, who is a well-known storytelling expert, and I consider him as my guide in storytelling, he years ago wrote this amazing book called Building a Story Brand. And he has a quote that I really love. He says that people don't buy the best products. They buy the ones that they understand the fastest. Now, I want you to think about that in a leadership context. Your employees are, of course, not buying products. You want them to buy your strategy or your goals or your vision or a project that they need to realize in a specific schedule. And they don't buy into these just because those are technically a really great plan. They buy into it when they understand clearly and quickly what's happening, what is their role in it, and when it emotionally makes sense to them to take part in it. So storytelling is what makes your vision as a leader easy to understand. It packages the why, the what, and the how into this format that people can actually recall and grasp long after they heard it. If a leader can articulate ideas in a way that others get those immediately, you'll struggle to gain traction. And Donald Miller's point is really about clarity, because stories are clarity machines. Simon Sinek drives this home from a different angle. He's famously said that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So in leadership terms, your team isn't motivated by the initiative that you're pushing nearly as much as why this initiative matters. So if you start with the why, which is the purpose, the cause, the belief behind your action, you actually tap into people's intrinsic motivation, which means that you don't have to try to motivate them externally with sticks and carrots, but they are intrinsically motivated to take part and contribute. How do you communicate the way effectively? By telling the story of it. By painting this vision, this picture of that future that you were trying to create and why it is so compelling. Sinek, who wrote the Start With Why book and created this whole or entire Start With Why framework, this is essentially a storytelling exercise because it urges leaders like you and I to frame our direction as a narrative about purpose. So storytelling is not a gimmick, it's a framework that is proven by science to have a very unique and special impact on the audience when it's used the correct way. So storytelling, like the Start With Why framework, they're both vehicles by which leaders set vision, transmit values, and bring everyone along for the journey. So it's not about something that you just do to launch an event or a marketing campaign. It's something so much more effective that you as a leader can actually weave into your everyday actions and interactions. And as we'll see, it's how you talk about not just success, but about failures. How you explain the decision-making behind and the decisions, and how you rally your troops in tough times. And because you also talk about the failures and the tough times, storytelling makes you seen as a more authentic, honest, and trustworthy leader, as most leaders prefer not to admit their failures or mistakes or talk about tough times publicly. So in short, while storytelling is a communication skill, we should really actually make it an important leadership competence in our leadership culture. Now, before I get carried away, I want to structure this a bit for you. So I've talked about why storytelling is important. Next, I want to tell you how specifically stories help leaders like you and I to excel. So there are some key leadership challenges that storytelling directly addresses. Those are clarity, decision making, emotional connection, and cultural alignment. And these areas, these are four big leadership areas, leadership needs that pretty much every leader struggles with at some point. And story can be your secret weapon or your secret superpower in each of these areas. Let's examine how stories can elevate your leadership and some concrete ways in which a storytelling approach can actually boost the impact of your communication. So here are four key benefits that you gain when you lead with story. The first benefit is clarity of the vision and strategy. So one of the hardest jobs of a leader is making complex ideas simple. Whether you're rolling out a new strategy or explaining a tough decision, you need clarity. You need to demonstrate clarity and take those people out of that fog that the complexity has created. Stories naturally clarify complex ideas by putting them into a context people find easier to connect with. And a well-chosen analogy or a narrative can turn abstract goals into something very tangible where the audience can actually visualize themselves taking part of. So for example, instead of saying we need to improve our customer service metrics, you might want to tell a brief story of a specific customer's pain point and how your team could be the hero in solving it. And suddenly this dry objective becomes a very relatable mission. When this vision is clear, people can align their efforts without constant micromanagement. They get it. And as Donald Miller reminds us, if your message isn't clear, people will tune out and move on. Storytelling forces you as a leader to distill what really matters in a digestible message. No more drowning your team in data with no context. It's clarity on a silver platter. The second benefit is better decision-making framework. Leaders are called upon to make decisions and to guide others in making decisions. Facts and analysis are, of course, important, but data alone doesn't tell you what decision feels right or wrong or meaningful. So stories help fill that gap by providing a framework of values and context to those facts and figures. And when you consistently share stories that highlight what's important, for instance, stories of employees going above and beyond for a customer, you implicitly communicate the values that actually drive those decisions. And the next time an employee is faced with a tough call, they recall the company lore and it will guide them. Also, when explaining the reasoning behind decision, framing it as a narrative, such as we chose path B because remember when we tried the A version, we saw this outcome and we learned that. So this turns a dry rational into a memorable lesson that we can actually reflect as a team. And essentially, these shared stories become a reference library for decision making for your team members. Everyone knows why we do things in a certain way because we have those stories that exemplify the right way to work or the right path to take or the right decision to make. So it's much more impactful than a list of do this and don't do that. The third benefit of storytelling as your leadership superpower is the emotional connection and trust that you're able to build. So this is the heart of it, in my opinion, because leadership is obviously about people and we are emotional beings. So you can't inspire anyone if you don't connect with them on an emotional level. Brené Brown is famed for her research on vulnerability, and she said that staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience that connection. So telling stories, especially those that show some vulnerability or realness, is one of the best ways to create connection. So when we as leaders share personal anecdotes or even failure stories with the lessons that we learn from them, it humanizes us. It shows that we are authentic, we are honest, we are transparent, and that we have that courage to do and say things that many others don't. And in contrast, leaders who only communicate in a sterile corporate speak, they never truly connect. And as a result, their teams might actually comply with instructions, but not commit with their hearts. And they are more likely to make unfavorable decisions because they don't understand how we do things here. So stories help you evoke empathy. Maybe you share a story of how a mentor once guided you through a career challenge to encourage mentorship in your company. And that can strike a chord in your team far more than saying mentorship is important. So emotional connection is really a great benefit because, as said, it builds trust. A team that feels connected to you as their leader, they're going to trust you more. And trust is the currency of high-performing teams. It's no surprise that many employees have been cited having an uncaring or uninspiring leader as a top reason why they leave a job. Nobody wants to follow someone who doesn't inspire them, who doesn't make them feel anything. Through genuine storytelling, it's almost automatic for you to demonstrate empathy and inspire loyalty if that doesn't come automatically from you. So this storytelling framework kind of automates the impact for you. The next benefit of using storytelling as a leadership communication skill is the cultural alignment and values that are shown in action. So every organization has a culture, whether it's by design or by default, and the best leaders actively shape that culture. And stories are your culture building tools. So the stories that get told and retold and reshared in a company become the cultural legends, the platform, guiding how we do things here. So if you as a leader start highlighting stories that reflect the values and the behaviors that you actually want to see in your team, in your people, you gradually steer the culture in that direction. And for instance, if innovation is a value, celebrate with a story of the quirky experiment that led to a breakthrough product. If collaboration is a value, tell the story of to departments that teamed up to solve a customer problem. People remember these illustrative tales far more than a paragraph in the employee handbook. So over time, these narratives align everyone on what the company stands for. It also helps in attracting like-minded talent and also customers, because the stories of who we are, they seep outside the company. In employer branding, we like to say your internal culture is your external brand. So this is really the key point here. The leadership narratives inside will influence how people outside the company perceive your company. There's a powerful line in my book: your organization's magnetism comes from your unique DNA. How your people lead, communicate, collaborate, and innovate. In other words, the way you and your team behave and communicate becomes the story of your culture. By actively telling those stories that highlight the best of that DNA, you strengthen internal alignment and ensure that the image you present to job candidates or customers is authentic. Everyone is set on the same page because they've heard the same core stories about what matters here over and over and over again, and in a really inspiring way. So these 4 benefits, clarity, decision guidance, emotional trust, and culture alignment, are game changers for you. When you incorporate storytelling in your leadership toolkit, you address some of the perennial pain points that us leaders often face. It's like adding a supercharger to your communications engine. But now I feel like you have a question in mind. If storytelling is so powerful and beneficial, why aren't all leaders doing it? Why do so many highly competent executives still struggle with delivering an inspiring message? I want to talk about that. Why is it hard, and how you can get better at it. So if you're listening to this and thinking, this all sounds so great, but I'm not much of a storyteller, you're not alone. The ability to tell stories is not decoded in us. So we have to learn it as a skill. The ability to understand and become inspired by stories is encoded in us. So we don't have to learn that as a skill. But telling stories, that's a skill that we have to learn. So many leaders find it challenging to communicate impactfully. And I did too when I first started as a team lead. And then I actually made the same mistakes with sales and other customer communication when I started my first business. But I've learned, and so can you. So I want to unpack a few reasons why that is and see how embracing storytelling addresses each. So first, a lot of leaders have been trained in a culture that values data, logic, and precision above all, right? Business schools teach us to make slides, write reports, and talk in numbers. When it's time to rally the team, however, we default to what we know, which are the charts and the spreadsheets and the bullet points. And I don't want you to get me wrong. Data and clarity are very important. And you can certainly weave those into your stories. But purely analytical communication often fails to spark action. Here's a striking statistic from McKinsey. They say that 70% of large-scale transformation programs in organizations fail. And the reason is poor communication, or one of the top reasons. So although leaders tend to invest heavily in new strategies and transformations, they often undermine and underinvestment the communication. And that is why those transformation programs then fail, because there is none of the empathetic or inspiring action taking place. And when leaders don't fully recognize communication's role in the successful adoption, and I'm not talking about the communication department's role, I'm talking about what comes out of your mouth or what you show people, what you demonstrate through your own behavior. When you don't fully recognize the role of your communication in successful adoption, you as a leader are more likely to experience poor ROI of a different kind. I love this. Low return on inspiration. So what does that mean? Leaders might have the right strategy, but if you can't communicate in an inspiring and clear way, and not just once, but repeating it, your employees won't buy it. Change doesn't happen, and the strategy dies on a vine. So one McKinsey study of over 18,000 professionals across 150 countries found that public speaking with an emphasis on storytelling is one of the foundational skills CEOs and senior leaders need to master this decade. So the business world is literally telling us we need to do storytelling. We need to communicate better, and storytelling is how we need to do it. So it's, of course, hard to break the habit. Many leaders struggle to communicate impactfully because they fear the simplicity that comes with storytelling. They worry that if they don't include every detail, or if they speak in soft terms, like feelings and emotions and stories, that they won't sound credible. But in reality, the opposite is true. Simplicity and authenticity makes you more credible. Think of a CEO who bombed the transformation announcement by focusing only on future growth and organizational charge. Employees did hear the message, but it failed to resonate. It did not inspire them to consider their role in it and what the future for them would look like, how they could contribute to a better future. So in fact, some employees misinterpreted the whole thing as an euphemism to cut jobs because no clear, compelling story was given to them. So then they filled the gaps in the way that they feared to be the truth that was being hidden. So now contrast that with a leader who communicates the why behind a change with a relatable story, perhaps telling how a changing customer need inspired the new direction, and painting a picture of what success looks like for everyone. That leader addresses fears, shows empathy, and gives people what we call a positive hook to latch onto. So storytelling fixes the clarity issue by giving context and meaning, and it fixes the inspiration issue by engaging people's emotions. Another reason leaders struggle is vulnerability because it feels risky. Many leaders hesitate to share personal stories or to acknowledge uncertainties. It feels safer to stick to impersonal facts. But as Brené Brown's research has shown us, vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a courage, and it's essential for trust. Sharing a story where maybe you weren't the triumphant hero, maybe you made a mistake or learned a lesson, can be incredibly impactful in your people. I remember once I was coaching a manager who had trouble getting their team to take ownership. And they kept saying, my team is so risk averse, they never speak up. And I asked them, have you ever told them about the time that you took a risk or spoke up? Maybe even a time that you failed while doing so and what that taught you. Now, this person was reluctant at first because it's human instinct to think that as a leader, we should always project just confidence and success. But they tried it. This person opened a team meeting with a story of a project that had gone horribly wrong earlier in their career and how with somebody's guidance, they were back on track. And this leader admitted how scary it felt for them at that moment. And that little story changed the atmosphere in the room. The leader told me that their team's eyes were like, oh my goodness, you're human too. So the discussion that day was one of the richest that they apparently had with the team. And it was kind of like a welcome invitation also for the team members to start sharing their own ideas and concerns more openly, because they felt that, well, if it goes wrong, my boss also has made mistakes and they're not perfect too. We're all just human. So by embracing that vulnerability aspect through storytelling, you can fix a communication block. This echoes Brené Brown's point that connection is built on letting ourselves be seen, because staying vulnerable is a risk that we have to take if we want to experience connection and build trust. And then there's also the issue of time and habit. Some leaders think, I don't have the time to tell a story. I really need to cut it to the chase. But a story doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be like this winding saga. It can be a 60-second anecdote that makes the point more effectively than 10 minutes of explanation. So we have to retrain ourselves to incorporate these narratives. It may feel awkward at first if you're not used to it, but it's a skill to practice, just like any other. But it's worth it, because a story, even if it's just a short one, can communicate so many multiple layers of meaning so much faster than your bullet points and your chart. I want to give you an example of a simple story of a customer interaction that can simultaneously highlight a problem, show the impact of your solution, and inspire your employees about why their work matters, all in a way that is so much more digestible than a bullet list of market problem, solution, benefit. Let's debunk this. So storytelling in leadership is not about being theatrical or saccharine. It's about being clear, authentic, and compelling. There is plenty of research and case evidence showing that story-driven communication improves your business outcomes. Companies that foster strong leadership communication see higher employee engagement and retention. And I know this is one of the greatest challenges business leaders and CEOs are facing today. And in one case study, a global firm implemented a leadership storytelling initiative, coaching leaders to be the storytellers and their culture ambassadors. And they saw trust in leadership increased by 30% with improved employee retention rates as a result. Now that is a very tangible return on inspiration, right? So when employees trust and feel inspired by you, they stick around and they give their best effort. A concept that McKinsey calls return on inspiration, the payoff you get when you ignite passion and motivation is seeing your people becoming inspired by you and wanting to stick around, wanting to do their best effort, and wanting to help you to empower others. Storytelling is one of the most effective approaches to boost that return on inspiration. If your communication as a leader only ever informs but never inspires, I think that you're leaving so much potential effort and goodwill and results also on table. So that any leader who struggles to communicate effectively and impactfully, learning storytelling is your next task. It might feel unfamiliar at first, but it directly addresses so many reasons why communication falls flat. It provides the clarity and it allows you to be empathetic without losing your authority. And it replaces confusion of cynicism with understanding and that engagement that you want as a result. Storytelling is the antidote to the communication woes that challenge so many organizations. So next week, I'm going to continue with this topic and share everything that you need to start putting this into practice. I'll give some practical tips for CEOs, executives, and team leads on how to start learning and practicing storytelling. And I want you to think of that as your storytelling starter kit. My name is Susanna Rantanen, and I bring you business storytelling to match minds with mission. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and stay story-driven.